Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Shadowlands Alpha video. Today we're going to be rolling through all of the class changes that have been announced as quickly as is humanly possible. There is a lot to cover, and the goal here is that you will be entirely caught up on what is going on. First though, I'm going to go over the key themes of these changes. First up, many spec-specific abilities have been baselined across whole classes, and in many cases that does things like free up talent slots, and it generally will give you, yes, more utility right across all your specs. Now the impact of all this is going to vary quite a bit depending on how much has been baselined for your class and how much the baseline things actually factor into your day-to-day rotation, but I think everyone can expect more buttons that they can press at least some of the time. In many cases, those buttons are utility, or there may be things that will help your allies, so that should mean that there'll be a decent bit more skill cap in maximally using your classes, which I think a lot of players are actually going to appreciate a lot with this expansion. Then next up, Blizzard are reworking many talent trees, as you would expect for a new expansion. Some talents are being merged into each other, some are having their core functionality be baselined, kind of like with Toxic Blades, so that's what's going on there with talents. We'll get into those on a spec-by-spec basis. Then also, new abilities. They've been rare as of late, but we are getting some here. So a few specs are getting an extra core button, some are getting new talents that are new buttons to press, and some are even getting little gameplay loops, like with the Blood DK. Then also, there have been some resource changes in the game. So all Paladins will use Holy Power. Arcane Mages have now got their mana changed just a little bit, and Maelstrom is totally gone. Totally gone. Zero Shaman specs or Builder Spender specs in Shadowlands, which is really great to hear. Of course though, the best way to understand all of this is just to jump in, so yeah, let's just go do that. Death Knights have baselined D&D, Anti-Magic Zone, Lichborn, Raise Dead, Chains of Ice, and a Sacrificial Pact that actually explodes their minion for some damage and healing. Overall though, right, it's more baseline CC for everyone with Chains, you've got D&D there for everyone, so a bit more AoE, more defensives with AMZ as well. So overall I'd say this means that each spec will be a bit more rounded. Okay, for Blood, well, Blood Tap has been redesigned. It now slurps up a rune from a dead enemy, and it's actually usable repeatedly whenever your Bone Shield charges are consumed. So basically, this is like a nice little extra gameplay loop within the spec. Then Rune Tap has been baselined, and Relish in Blood will synergize with Bone Shield and Death and Decay. So overall, I'd say smaller but pretty good changes. Now, Frost, they get two-handed finally, and also Frostworm's Fury is baselined. Then Hypothermic Presence is a new talent that will half the cost in RP of abilities for a period of time. And overall, there's not much changed here, but I think these are certainly changes people will care about, with being able to do two-handed if you want. And then, of course, you also do benefit from the baselining of stuff across all of the specs. And then for Unholy, it's kind of similar. The core here is that Gargoyle is baseline. Then Army of the Damned, well, that's a new talent that gets you a Magus of the Dead. And this Magus will lob ranged attacks and also empower your ghouls. Now on that topic, Army of the Dead's cooldown is reduced by Death Coil and Epidemic now, and the same goes for Apocalypse, and Apocalypse when used will also summon one of those Magi. So overall, with the cooldown reductions, there's a bit more interactivity, and then there's also a bit more focus on pets, especially because their mastery increases their shadow damage, but also all of their pet damage. So there you go, that is the Death Knights. Demon Hunters. We all get Immolation Aura baseline, that frees up a talent slot, and I think that's just going to feel great on Havoc. Now, jumping into Havoc, well, they have a higher Fury cap now. This is pretty cool. This will allow for more resource pooling, so for an example, for use during your trinkets if they're on use, or maybe Demonic. That's great. I think it's a little bit of a higher skill ceiling in the sort of planning department, which is really good. Then Essence Break replaces the Dark Slash talent. It essentially is an easier to use version, right? It gives you that damage buff to your Chaos Strike and your Blade Dance, but that buff resides on your character, so yeah, I think a bit more usable, and also something that will work a bit better with the higher Fury cap. Overall, I'm really looking forward to having that stuff, and then, I mean, just having Immolation Aura default means I can have something else in that talent row, which will give me more stuff to do. So smaller, but actually quite impactful changes that I am excited to test out. Then onwards to Vengeance. Well, they get Fell Devastation baselined, which is great, and they also get Demonic, with, of course, Fell Devastation triggering Metamorphosis via Demonic. This is great. I'm really happy with that. They're also doing a bit of a talent rework. So for one example, one turns Fell Devastation overhealing into a shield. Another one rips and consumes 5 soul frags from nearby enemies. Overall, I'd say these seem like good changes. I really like the Demonic loop, and I do suspect it's going to feel quite good in this spec. And certainly Fell Devastation is an ability I've just always enjoyed using anyway. So good stuff there. Next up, Druids, and wow, you guys are getting a lot baseline. So you can all use Ferocious Bite, Bark Skin, Cyclone, Stampeding Roar, and Iron Fur, and then Heart of the Wild is back. And then, you know, your affinity talents, well, they now also give you an extra on-use ability. So the Balance one gives you Typhoon, the Feral one Maim, Guardian one gives you an Incapacitating Roar, and then the Resto one gives you Ursol's Vortex. Overall, what does this mean? Well, I think that shape-shifting fantasy and just having more of a larger hybrid toolkit, that is all doubled down on here, and I think that's going to be really, really great. And also, just for the people who have a little bit higher of a skill ceiling, or, you know, a skill cap, whatever, they will be able to play around more of these mechanics and get more out of their Druid, which I think for those players is going to be very, very satisfying. Let's get into the spec, starting off with Balance. So, Balance, right, it has had quite the change. Empowerments are now replaced with Eclipses, and they operate similarly to how they did all the way back in Wrath of the Lich King. So, Wrath and Starfire will now give each other the alternating lunar and solar eclipses for a longer duration, and then you get moments that allow for both to occur at once. Then, Star Surge, well, that extends your current eclipse, so that's a little bit more extra interactivity, which I really do appreciate. Then Starfall is actually back to its older design, so it's no longer a ground target, and also it will refresh your dots. So basically, right, your arcane power that you're generating, you're either using that to extend your eclipse or to do AoE and refresh your dots. All this to me sounds good in principle, but I think as always with the Balance spec, historically, for me it comes down to pacing and feel, and that's something that I can only really get a read on once I've actually played it. And suffice to say, this will be top of my priority for specs to play as soon as alpha hits. The next up, a curious one for Feral. So Blood Talons has been reworked, such that using Shred, Rake, and Ferocious Bite in quick succession will empower your next rip. So it's interesting. I think this is a bit more clear than the older design, but again, the feel will come down to pacing. Right now though, Blood Talons works based on Predatory Swiftness's ability to give you that instant regrowth. So we're basically seeing here a new way, a more simple way to get to the same end result. So yes, it seems more clear and simple, a bit more accessible, but as to whether or not that will be a net gain, it will be hard to say. I think, yes, more accessible Blood Talons, a lot of people will like that, but then there's also a little bit of me that worries about how the actual pressing of those buttons will feel. So yeah, you know what, this is just another one that I really will have to try out myself, and don't worry, I'll get you a video on it. Then next up for Guardian, honestly, there's barely anything changed there. Like, okay, Berserk is back, and there's a new instant heal talent, so that's what's going on there. And then Resto also does not have that much, bar Swiftmend moving in a direction that I personally like, and that's it having a lower CD and a lower cost, but consuming your dots. So back to that older design, and I like the interplay there. Well, Nature Swiftness is back, giving you an instant cast, and Nourish is a talent that will give you a heal on your ally that's really big, but will get triple the impact from your mastery. Now, your mastery increases the healing for each hot on the target, so you can kind of see the interplay there. Overall, though, a very similar kit. I like the Swiftmend change, but I imagine the core gameplay is going to feel largely similar. Again, something to test. Next up, Hunters. So, Arcane Shot, Eyes of the Beast, Hunter's Mark, Kill Shot, Scared Beast, Trank Shot, they're all baseline. And we've got a large increase to our stable size. Overall, that's really good. There's more flexibility, and I think it'll feel like no matter what spec you are, you're still a Hunter, which is a really good direction to go in. Of course, though, we really will need to see how the Arcane Shots fit into all of the specs, though. Now, the other changes, I've got to admit, are on the smaller end of things. For Beast Mastery, look, there's reworked talents that all just tie into the same existing gameplay. So you've got a talent that gives you Barbed Shot charges, there's a new one that's a Beast Attack, and there's one that gives you a Spitting Cobra after using Bestial Wrath, but that is charged up based on how many Cobra shots you used during Wrath. So you can see how those all just feed into really the same Beast Mastery that you will be used to. Then for Marksmanship, similarly small changes. Binding Shackles adds a defense defensive element to Binding Shot, while Volley is back as a talent, which I really do like, and then it also interacts with Trick Shot, and then there's also Deadeye, which I actually really do love as a talent. Basically, it gives you 2 kill shot charges when you use it, but it makes it so that your aim shot recharge is faster after kill shot is used. I think that could be really fun, and I especially like how I think that could shake up your execute range gameplay for that spec, so could be pretty cool. And then finally for survival, well, if you wanted explosive shot and ranged back, you're not getting that. Basically, its core spells do more damage, and Chakram has got a cost reduction. Overall, super similar. I'll see if any of these smaller things like feel different and how the baseline ability changes impact that spec as well as the others, but yeah, survival, very, very much similar. Alright, Mage time. So you've got baselined Arcane Explosion, Fire Blast, Frost Bolt, and Mirror Image, with Frost and Fire Ward also returning. Then every Mage gets Alter Time, which is pretty great to have again, and then also the Focus Magic talent, which basically, right, it buffs an ally's crit, but then whenever the ally gets that crit buff and it actually procs, you will also get that same buff on your character. So a little bit of a more unique and sort of interactive, cooperative talent choice for every single Mage. Spec-wise, let's jump into Arcane, who get an extra clear casting stack. They get Touch of the Magi baseline, and they have their Mastery impacting all their spells. But the big thing is Enlightened. This is a new effect, right? And it causes you to do extra arcane damage when above a certain mana amount, and then to have better regen when you are below that amount. And instantly to me, that reminds me of the sort of mana and damage breakpoints of the Mists of Pandaria gameplay. But overall though, it just means you want to plan a little bit more with your mana for those really big deeps moments, because if you've got a big cooldown going on, you'll want to have that full mana bar so that you're at the right side of that passive effect. And with that covered, let's talk about fire. So Ignite is now sparked off by Fire Blast, okay? So the way this works is that if you use Fire Blast on an ignited enemy, that will spread Ignite to up to 8 more targets. So there's that, then there's a talent update, so Blast Wave does a bit more damage and slows longer. The cooldown reduction of Kindling has been increased, and then Pyroclasm has its damage bonus increased to make those hardcast pyros feel a bit better. Overall though, fire is pretty darn similar. I've always thought it's pretty fun though, so I imagine, yeah, it's still going to continue to be pretty fun. And next up for Frost, a bit of an interesting one. So the Winter's Chill flurry mechanic has been made essentially easier to use and less punishing. So essentially the way that works is that Flurry's Winter's Chill debuff is longer, okay? And that means that you'll always, basically always, have your next 2 spells be treating your target as if it's frozen. Now, that does remove a bit of the nuance and skill cap of the way that it currently works, even though really the current system does feel a bit like predicated on the spell travel time and is a little bit more fiddly to use. Although I'm not that sure. I mean, getting 2 hits within Winter's Chill, to me it always felt quite good. So if it's less punishing, I've got to wonder, will it not feel as good to use anymore? Kind of hard to say, if I'm honest. I'll have to test it out, though on paper it shouldn't change gameplay that much. Next up, we got the monks. So basically here, Expel, Harm, Fortifying Brew, Spinning Crane Kick, and Touch of Death are all baselined. What's cool about Touch of Death, though, is that it's actually returned to its old style of instantly killing a target that's below your health, but each spec also gets a new effect from Touch, so that's pretty cool. Then also, every spec gets their Celestial Summon spell baseline. Now, we'll kick them off with Brewmaster. First, you can be one-handed or two-handed, which is great. Then Shuffle will increase your physical stagger whenever you're using basically your sort of core kit. Then Celestial Brew, that's a new defensive that will absorb damage based on your AP. And then Clash is a new engagement tool that you've got, and that will cause you and your target to basically just charge each other, meet at the middle, but your target will be rooted. Then Successful Touches of Death will clear your stagger, which is pretty cool. Talent-wise, you've got Celestial Flames. This causes your brews to sometimes give you a buff that will increase your Breath of Fire's duration and, importantly, spread its dot to crane-kicked targets. And then also Exploding Keg, which gives you a blind and a dot with your keg. So a few changes that are pretty nice, and it's certainly going to be nice to have all of those baseline abilities as well. I do actually expect that clearing stagger with Touch of Death will feel pretty rewarding to do, especially in, say, a Mythic Plus scenario. So yeah, seems pretty cool, and let's move on. Mistweaver seems super similar. For them, Touch of Death will spawn some healing orbs for your allies, and then Chi-Ji, well, that now actually heals enemies based on your damage, and it also makes you immune to movement impairing effects. So what that's got me thinking about, obviously, is Fist Weaving. And assuming that Fist Weaving PvP talent is still there, then yeah, these two would be a pretty darn fun combo in PvP situations. Anyway, next, let's talk about Windwalker. It's very similar. It can do one-handed or two-handed, and its Touch of Death will spawn some Chi Spheres for you. Now, Dance of Chi-Chi is a new thing that basically gives you a free Crane Kick proc, but that's it. There's not much change here. We're just going to have to wait and see what this is actually like once it's live. Okay, Paladin time. You guys have got a lot of baselining going on, okay? So you're getting your Blessing of Sacrifice, Hammer of Wrath. Oh, yes, I'm so happy about that being baseline. So you're getting those, also Sense Undead, Shield of the Righteous, Turn Evil, and Word of Glory, all baseline. Then, Holy Power. It's back for all your specs. And that's totally going to change, I think, a lot of the feel of those specs. You're also all going to be having Concentration Aura, Crusader Aura, Devotion Aura, and also a new Retribution Aura that actually, whenever an ally dies, will give you wings. So you got that going on. Then, and in line with the Holy Power changes, you're all getting talents that impact your Holy Power, right? Every spec is. So what does that mean? It means Divine Purpose for all. It means Holy Avenger, which increases the HP generation for you. And those, of course, will all play well into Seraphim. So yes, it seems like everyone is getting Seraphim. Now for the specs themselves, look, the core is that Glimmer is now a talent for Holy, which is pretty nice. I think a lot of Holy Paladins really did enjoy playing Glimmer, and maybe Glimmer was one of the very few good things that came from the Azerite gearing system. Then for Prot, well, you can get free Word of Glory procs from your Judgment crits, which could be quite nice to play around, especially for the higher skill cap people like healing your allies. And then also, for Ret, Wake of Ashes baseline plus Imperium Power as, well, something moved from Azerite to a talent. Yeah, for these, a lot of it's going to come down to feel, right? Like, how does Holy Power actually interact with the specs that now have it? Right now, we can't be too sure until we've played it, so again, obviously, the Paladin stuff, like, they'll be some of the first specs that I'll be checking out when I get in the alpha. Okay, Priest time, so you are getting baselined Mind Blast, Mind Soothe, Shadow Word Death, Shadow Word Pain, and Power Infusion, which, by the way, can now be cast on your allies, so that's lovely. More externals, more ways to play, pretty good. For Disc, you're getting a talent that adds a heal to Power Word Barrier and causes it to heal again whenever it just expires. Then there's Shadow Covenant, which is actually a pretty cool talent addition, so it instantly heals a target and 4 allies, right? But, and then it also increases your damage, but, and the big but, is that it locks you out of holy spells. So that basically means you're really focusing on your atonement healing, which means if you want to use that, well, you had better have set up your atonement stuff beforehand. And I guess in line with that, Mind Blast for Discipline will deal super strong damage and atonement healing, but it's going to be pretty darn expensive to cast. So you've got that going for you. Now then, Holy. Well, Holy are getting baseline Circle of Healing, so that's no longer a talent, and then they're getting a talent that empowers Circle of Healing to reduce the cast time of Prayer of Healing. And that's basically it. So far, you know, a bit more AoE kit there, but really not that much in terms of Holy changes. They will feel largely the same. Now, for Shadow, again, small changes. Death and Madness will give you a bunch of Insanity and a cooldown reset whenever your target dies with Shadow or Death, so that's pretty good. Then Surrender to Madness, once again, as is a per expansion theme, has been reworked. It gives you a massive Insanity gen buff, and actually lets you cast while moving, so that's pretty sweet. But whenever its buff expires, if your target's still alive, you will die. So basically, right, it's no longer about sanity drain, it's just about however long that buff lasts. So basically, I think this is an easier to balance one that'll probably fit into the game a bit better, though I think some of the coolness of the more crazy designs of the past may actually be lost here. Now, whether that is a pro or a con, I think that depends on maybe you and your guild. That'll be something to test, and that's something where I really will be listening to the Shadow Priest community. And then next up, Rogues. So you're all getting baseline, instant crippling, and numbing poison. So finally, some rogue fantasy to every spec. And then also Shiv is back for everyone to empower your poisons on the target. And then also Pickpocket will interact with Crimson Vial. So depending on what you pickpocket, it augments your next vial. So I guess that means combat prep by pickpocketing, I suppose. Either that or maybe pickpocketing in combat, which would be a bit weird, but overall, that's another like little interaction, right? Another little gameplay loop that I think will just add a little bit more texture to every single rogue, so that's a change that I really like. Getting into the specs though, well, for Assassination, Ambush is back, and there's a talent that can let you proc its use out of stealth, so you've got that going on. Then Shiv will mirror Toxic Blade's functionality, but Toxic Blade is still a talent, but it's just one that empowers Shiv a bit more, doubling down on that gameplay. Really, that's all that we know so far. Of course, there will be, you know, your Covenant stuff interacting with all this, but yeah, not really massive changes. Next up though, Outlaw's pretty different, so Roll the Bones is now a cooldown. It's no longer a finisher. The cooldown of it though is reduced whenever you spend your combo points. Then you've got In Between the Eyes, right? That's now actually an increase to the enemy's crit damage taken. It's no longer a stun. And when we combine these two changes, I think it's obvious what they're going for here. They want to balance out the Spec's gameplay, right? I think they're moving a bit of focus away from Roll the Bones and towards just your general combat with that Between the Eyes change. Roll the Bones is a cooldown. Use it on cooldown, right? Reusing it sort of during its buff duration to get a better roll, depending on, you know, what your weak aura says, that's no longer going to be a thing, it seems. So maybe a bit more simplified, but the core gameplay of doing Roll the Bones and then maybe having slightly different decisions to make depending on how it goes, I think that still is going to be present for this spec. But maybe this just makes it a little bit more balanced out and just a little bit more easy for Blizzard to balance in terms of the numbers. Then finally, we've got sub. So Find Weakness is now baseline, and its use will mark targets for your new finisher, which is called Shadow Vault, which, yeah, will just do, you know, damage to the marked targets. So yeah, some nice setup and payoff work there. Then Dark Shadow is baseline, but that seems to be balanced by you actually shadow dancing a bit less. Then Rupture is back instead of Nightblade, but the Nightblade effects are basically still there, right? Because you've got your poisons, and those poisons will sort of apply those effects. So basically, right, you've got new gameplay in Find Weakness and Shadow Vault, but less of an emphasis on the rapid shadow dancing. That makes me wonder, because this was traditionally a spec that was very hard to get into, very high skill cap, if they've maybe lowered some of that so that more people can get into it. Now, as to whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not 100% sure. I think I would have liked at least the option to have the super rapid shadow dancing version of that be there. But right now, that's just based on me reading into Blizzard's wording. And again, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We will just have to test that out in alpha. Shamans. Shamans are going to be very happy, I think. So, 2 specs have been reworked because the Maelstrom resource is gone. So that's pretty cool. Then Chain Heal, Chain Lightning, Healing Stream Totem, Flame Tongue Totem, Frost Shock, Flame Shock, Lightning Shield, and Searing Totem. That's a lot of things. They're all baseline. What does that mean, right? It means more hybrid power, more options, more utility. That's all really good. Let's talk about Elemental. It's basically back to its WoD design. So Maelstrom is gone, and that means that it's all about your cooldown management and the core being that lava burst gameplay. Now, Earthshock and Lightning Bolt, well, that gameplay is still going to be there via the Fulmination system that we will remember from Warlords of Draenor. So that stuff is basically tracked on a buff rather than being the entire resource system of the class, meaning that yes, it's no longer a builder-spender. Just like with Enhancement. Yes, like with Elemental, Enhancement is now all about your cooldown management, and no Maelstrom there as a resource. Now, Maelstrom Weapon is there. That will give you a chance to get a stack of a buff that will make your next healing or damage spell be instant. And that means that at the core, right, it's about sort of getting your stacks of that buff and then weaving your range and your melee attacks. Flame Tongue and Wind Fury will both be back for your weapons, and Hailstorm has been redesigned to reset the cooldown of Flame Shock and Frost Shock whenever you use Storm Strike, which of course would be pretty great for spreading your dots about. Now, Searing Assault is also there. It's a powerful fire attack that causes your Searing Totem to start casting super quickly and your Flame Shock to accelerate its ticks. Now, if you've been able to get some Flame Shock resets and spread that around, I think that will feel very satisfying to use indeed. That's not all though, so Overcharge will grant you 5 stacks of Maelstrom Weapon, and then Stormkeeper, well, that will make your next 2 Chain or Bolt Lightnings be instant and deal more damage. Now the thing here is that Stormkeeper will benefit from Maelstrom Weapon, and that means, right, you could get 3 Maelstrom Weapon stacks, okay, and then you could cast Stormkeeper and then 2 Lightnings and do that super fast for a bunch of damage. Then also Elemental Blast is actually back as a talent for them and will interact with your Maelstrom Weapon stuff. Overall, right, what's the core here? They're moving away from being a builder-spender, and it's now about smart use of CDs and planning what you want to achieve ahead of time. Just that, I mean, yeah, you will have a little bit of RNG with how your Storm Strikes are working. I think for me, what's really the best about this change is just the pacing of the spec, right? Because right now in the game, you get so many resources, and this is something that was really identified in the alpha and beta of BFA. But you're so flooded with Maelstrom, you're always capping it, even if you're getting back-to-back, like Storm Strikes, and it just doesn't feel that good. So I think that this could really change up the just the pace of this spec in a really good way, and I think the same also goes for Elemental. Overall, I'm a lot more excited to be like trying out a shaman given these changes than I would have been in the past. So definitely good stuff. And just to round off the shamans, well, Resto is super similar. Basically, right, they've got a baseline Earth Shield and a new talent that adds more interactions to it. Overall though, I always really enjoyed that spec for healing, so it's probably still going to be great. Okay, Warlock. So curses of tongues, recklessness, weakness, and doom are baseline for all of yous, plus demonic circle. Also, you've got a new talent called Tongue Tied. Now, this will empower spells that hit targets who have got Curse of Tongues on them, and that locks them out of healing for a little while. So that's another bit in your kit. Now, spec-wise, being real with you, Demo and Destro are going to essentially be the same. They have got minor tweaks to talents. I imagine we'll see more tweaks and actually be able to properly talk about it once the testing starts. For Affliction though, well, you guys are going to be different. Unstable Afflictions have got a longer duration, they don't stack, and they don't use soul shards. The point here is clear, right? Lots of dots and spreading them, instead of focusing on your burst damage by your overlapping UAs. Then you've got Malefic Rupture, so that's a new baseline ability that deals damage to enemies based on how many dots are on those enemies. Now, they didn't say it, but I assume this is your new Soul Shard spender, so there's that. And this is also something that will work quite nicely with the newly buffed Sow the Seeds. Overall, right, I'd say this, pace-wise, will feel very different to play indeed, so this is something that, yeah, obviously, I'll just have to go and check out. Okay, warrior time. Wow, get ready for this. Execute, hamstring, ignore pain, shield block, shield slam, spell reflection, whirlwind, shattering throw, challenging shout, and intervene. You're getting all of them baseline, and you're also getting double time and war machine as talent choices across every spec. Man, that's great. That's more utility for everyone, more tools in your kit, and that means more room for the skilled players to shine, and that's something we've seen across so many classes in the game. Okay, with that, let's get into the specs. So for arms, look, the base is the same. You've got a new Cleave talent, which basically makes Cleave a follow-up to a 3-target Whirlwind that will spread deep wounds, and then Deadly Cam has been redesigned to remove the rage cost of your next 4 abilities, and then passively to just increase your max rage. Then Dreadnought also essentially bakes in Seismic Wave, which was an Azerite trait, and also will synergize with Sweeping Strikes. Then for Fury, well, it's quite similar. So you've got Fervor of Battle, that's a new talent that makes your Whirlwind do a slam, which will give you some more damage and rage, slamming your primary target. Then Onslaught has been added as a talent pick. It does strong damage and generates rage, but it's only usable when you are in rage. So again, that'll just tie into the core gameplay loop of this spec. Then Wrecking Ball is back, and Fresh Meat will cause Bloodthirst to always enrage you the first time that you use it on a target. So if you're leveling out in the world, that's going to be great. If you're in a dungeon, well, if you're spreading out your Bloodthirsts around targets, you're going to be guaranteeing yourself a good bit more enrages. Same goes for, say, ad fights in raiding. So yeah, I think that's actually a really, really cool talent. I like that quite a bit. Then finally for Fury, Frothing Berserker is now a haste and mood speed buff that will trigger once you hit 100 rage. Finally then, we've got Protection, where a few talents have been reimagined, with Best Served Cold increasing your revenge damage. That is especially after its dodge and parry proc that props up. Then Menace has been redone as well. It will buff your Intimidating Shout to fear enemies, but also knock back your non-primary targets, so that's also pretty cool. Then Indomitable will passively increase your health and cause Rage Spend to heal whenever it's actually used as an active ability. Then finally, Never Surrender will increase the power of Ignore Pain based on your missing health. Oh, and with that, it's time for a big deep breath because we have just went through all of the changes. Overall, I'd say I'm pretty happy about this. There's one or two things I'm a little bit worried about. Like, I am worried, would something be lost from Blood Talents if that was changed? But I then think about the other stuff. And, as somebody who was just maining a Demon Hunter, right? Having Immolation Aura by default and then something else in that talent row, that seems really good. A Dark Slash replacement that is just a little bit more viable in real-world gameplay scenarios, that also sounds great. And having a higher cap for my resources such that I can plan ahead a little bit more, that also sounds really great. And then if I just think about some other real high points for me, there's nice fantasy things, right? Like being one-handed or two-handed in a few specs if you want to. Then, thinking about the Druids. I think the Druids are going to be really happy that they can have their Roar movement speed ability. Man, having that across every spec, that's going to make so many happy druids. If I think about the shamans as well, man, elemental enhancement, I obviously don't know if they're going to feel better, but certainly in my personal opinion and from my testing, it would be hard to feel worse than the enhancement shaman that you know that I played on the alpha and beta test of BFA, and then I've also, I mean, is this account sharing? Look, I may have been right at Matt's keyboard. I may have been at his keyboard when he was playing his 120 enhancement shaman, and I may have tried it out on his computer, which I know by the TOS is a very spooky thing indeed. But yeah, no, I hopped on his spec one time in the office just to give it a shot, and man, it wasn't good in BFA. I really didn't like it. So just the potential there of those two specs being in a way better state, that's also really exciting. And then when I think about all these baseline abilities, you know, like, I think for a lot of people, okay, you're probably going to be able to play the nearly exact same spec that you're playing now, okay? I think there's going to be like times where you'll get obviously new buttons through the Covenants and one or two new buttons in general for some specs, but all that baseline stuff, that means that the really skilled players, you know, if maybe they're in their DPS spec, but they've gained a new external that they can use on a raid member, well, that's going to allow for way more times to shine. I mean, another nice one is, you know, the Word of Glories proccing from your judgment crits on the prot paladins. That could be really cool because, hey, maybe the prot paladin doesn't need that heal, but maybe they can throw it at another party member who does need that heal, right? There's just a lot of really good things along those lines. Now, I also do think that there are a lot of people who will want Legion tier revamps for more specs than we've sort of had those revamps for. I mean, we've certainly had revamps. I'd say revamps in feel for a lot of the paladins, for a lot of the shamans, stuff like that. There may be some others. I'm especially thinking about the hunter, right? Like, my first main was a hunter, right? I went hunter, monk, then DH. Certainly, I think that this will make the hunters feel a little bit better, yes, but I don't think it's going to make the hunters something I'm really going to want to jump back to. That was really my experience when I was testing the things mainly in both Legion and BFA. They were just very mixed for me. I mean, like, survival's really cool, and when it's got a lot of like ratings being high, especially the haste, I think it does feel pretty good to play. But it's still not really the core fantasy that a lot of people would have wanted from that, which is something more along the lines of the original survival. Or, I mean, I say the original survival, the survival that was realistically played for most of WoW's life, which was a range spec. Yes, it had some melee things, but it was a range spec. So yeah, there's going to be some things that won't make some people happy, but broadly speaking, I'm pretty darn happy with the direction we're going in. Obviously, we need to take a look at Soulbinds. We need to see how the Covenant abilities change. And indeed, this is, like, I mean, the alpha technically is out there for the devs to play, but we can't play it yet. So this is super early, and I would expect a fair amount of this stuff to change, but perhaps for the principles of these changes to remain decently consistent. So there you go, classes. That was a long video. I think I'm going to go lie down. Thank you for watching. Let me know, though, what are you the most excited by? You know, what's exciting you? What's disappointing you? What is just sort of up in the air for you? You want to see more? Let me know down below. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.